Hello and welcome to another edition of Veterans Corner. I'm Marshal Preston, U.S. Air Force Lieutenant Colonel retired, and your host for today's segment. Veterans Corner is an initiative of your Westborough Veterans Advisory Board and graciously produced by our partners here at Westborough Television. The goal of Veterans Corner is to share information on topical issues that may affect our veterans, families, residents, and friends within our community. It's also an opportunity to spotlight local veterans where we seek to share some of their experiences and stories to highlight their service and continued civic contributions to the community at large. And by doing so, we hope to educate the community of the variety and breadth of experiences that veterans have, and perhaps break down some of the assumptions, biases, or stereotypes that we may hold on to, consciously or unconsciously. To that end, we are quite fortunate to have Rae Ellis, a Navy nurse and this year's Memorial Day Grand Marshal, here with us today. I'm looking forward to the conversation ahead. Welcome, Bonnie.
Thank you.
Thank you again for joining us and being willing to participate.
As I said, I am very honored that I was asked to be the Grand Marshal.
Well, we're looking forward to hearing your words of wisdom and sharing some of your experiences. Having a medical side of the story is always good. My wife was a nurse in the Air Force, so have some personal ties and connections to that medical side. And then, not forgetting that there are many, many women that have served our great nation in uniform. So looking forward to having that highlighted through you. So if you don't mind, let's start at the beginning. Where were you born? What family?
Okay, I was born in Westborough. I grew up, went through the Westborough school systems, and my father was a chicken farmer. And so I have come back to my roots. I've lived in various places, but eventually made my way back to Westborough.
And do you have chickens?
We don't have any chickens, yeah.
Okay. Well, good. Well, welcome back. How long have you been back?
So I moved back in 1981, so
okay.
I've been back quite a while, yeah.
That's fantastic. So tell me about your path to service and uniform.
So I went, after high school graduation, I went to the University of Massachusetts. And actually I started out in elementary education because I really was not quite sure what I wanted to do with my life. My mother was a nurse, and during the summertime I would do hospital working, and I did as a nurse's aide, and decided that really was what my calling was. And I so admired my mother, so I transferred my credits and I stayed at UMass, and I went into the nursing program.
Super. Okay, and then you graduated, and did you?
No. Well, yes, I did graduate, yeah. I did eventually graduate. But so then I had to start, my nursing program had to start from scratch, so I actually spent 5 years. And my last 2 years, I was wondering, okay, what do I do? And I learned about the Navy Nurse Candidate Program.
Fantastic.
And decided to explore that because I'd always had, and I don't know if it's a morbid side of me, but I always had an interest in the military, not because I had any history in the family of that, but I just appreciated what the military stood for, the courage, and so I decided that I would explore this Navy Nurse program and was accepted into it. And so my last 2 years, I was first an enlisted, and then 6 months before graduation, I was commissioned as an ensign in the Navy, in the Navy program. So.
That's fantastic. And give us a time frame. What year?
So 1967.
Okay.
And I graduated in 1969, and then spent a month in Newport, Rhode Island, to learn about the military and officers training, and then was stationed in St. Albans, New York, at the St. Albans Naval Hospital in Queens.
Pretty good spot.
Well, it was funny because I went on the buddy system. There was another nurse in my program, and we both went into the same program, and we could go together. So we were given 3 opportunities of where we wanted to be stationed. And so we picked San Diego, Pensacola,
Yeah.
and then Bremerton, Washington. And then we got our orders, and it was St. Albans, New York. And he said, was that even on the list?
Classic government.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So instead of seeing the world, we went to Queens, New York. But it was a wonderful experience.
Okay.
Wonderful experience.
Well, sorry, let's go back a little bit
Sure.
to UMass and sort of your enlisted time and give me a sense of how big was this program? How many students on campus? You know, was it you just stumbled across the Navy Nurse Corps?
You know, I have really tried to search my memory. I don't know, except my family was quite friendly with Admiral Denfield
Okay.
here in town, and so I'm not sure whether that I learned about it through him,
Right.
but I can't honestly tell you how I learned about it.
Okay. Did any sense of, the history book suggests that it was a tenuous time on campuses. Do you remember any of that tension?
You know, truthfully, no, not at UMass. I don't remember that. So going into it during the Vietnam era, I guess I was kind of naive. At that point in time, I wasn't really well educated in that aspect of it. So I just thought it was a good program. And as I said, I always had an interest in the military. So I thought it was a good fit.
Yep. So tell us a little about that enlisted period. Was it all just schoolwork, or did you spend the summer
No, other than I had to remember to ask for leave
to go home for
to go home.
the holidays?
Yeah, which was kind of strange, you know.
Yep.
It just didn't sink in right away. But
Hopefully you didn't learn that the hard way.
no, I didn't learn the hard way. I didn't go AWOL.
Good. Okay.
No.
So in '69 you graduated and commissioned as a
Ensign.
ensign in the U.S. Navy.
Yep.
Okay. And then orders to St. Albans and Queens, New
Yep.
York. Tell us about St. Albans. How big of a hospital
It was
it?
quite big. So at the time that I was there, we had about 2,000 patients.
Okay.
And we had all services. So even though it was a naval hospital, we did have all branches that would come back there.
As far as patients, was the staff
Patients.
also a joint staff?
No, it was all naval.
Okay.
staff.
And was there a specialty of that hospital, burn unit or amputation or any particular?
It was all purpose.
Okay.
I mean, we had every unit, every ward was a different ward.
Okay.
So there was a medical chest ward, which I was assigned to initially, and we saw a lot of malaria, excuse me, a lot of malaria patients coming back
Okay.
from Vietnam there. And then, but we would cover, because we did all 3 shifts, we would cover units that were heavily orthopedic, which was very
Tough.
tough.
Yep.
Yeah. But then there was a mental health unit, there was a plastic surgery unit, so it was all specialties. And then we had a big TB unit,
Oh.
because we saw a lot of TB coming back.
Okay. Fairly surprising on that, between the TB and malaria. Those two weren't, it seems obvious when I think about it, but it wasn't something that I had registered prior to this conversation.
No, it was, there was a lot of patients. In
Yeah.
fact, I got worked up for TB at one point.
Okay.
Fortunately, it wasn't TB, it was a strange kind of pneumonia, but it was quite prevalent.
Okay. And as a gentleman who's had plenty of inoculations and immunizations, is your shot record also full, having served in a military hospital and sort of knowing that you'd be exposed to patients that are carrying these types
I
of...
mean, we were required to
Yep.
have those.
Okay. Are there any particular patients that stick out in your mind?
Yeah, there were a couple on the medical chest that they came down with sarcoidosis, and that they were there for quite a while, that you just got quite close to because of that, what they were going through. And then the orthopedic unit, which, as I said, was very traumatic. Traumatic injuries, but it's trauma to see that. It was things that you obviously never saw in nursing nursing school. And I would also say that it was the corpsmen. I have to give a shout out to the corpsmen because I was brand new. And going to a degree program at UMass, you don't get a lot of clinical. You get a lot of textbook learning, but the clinical was limited. So I was learning along with them. And these were 18, 19-year-old girls and boys. And I admire them so immensely.
Well, that's a great point. And sort of talk through that challenge of being, an officer and therefore granted some level of authority over the enlisted class, and yet still being young yourself, and sometimes outranking, older men and women that are also serving. It's wonderful exercise in leadership and authority and balancing, that communication style. But it sounds like you had some wonderful, enlisted mentors that coached you along.
My senior corpsman, then when I first got there, he came off a hospital ship, and he just knew so much, and he had a wonderful sense of humor, and he laughed a little bit at my leadership style because it was kind of shaky. I wouldn't say that I was the greatest leader. It
takes practice.
It just didn't fit my personality.
Right.
But he kind of guided me along the way and helped me.
Okay. And tell us about your leadership chain, above you. How big of a unit and how influential were they in your day-to-day tasks?
Somewhat, but we were pretty much left to our own devices. And again, what our typical shift was 10 days on days, 7 to 3, standard, and then we would go on 7 days of nights, and then we would go to 7 days of 3 to 11, and back again. So we had different people that were sort of our supervisors because of that, because they would be rotating their shifts as well. Okay.
Did your classmate from UMass sort of stick with you? Were there any, sort of...
Well, we roomed together for quite a while. We actually got an apartment off base when we first went there, and with 2 other Navy nurses, and then eventually I went back to the nurses' quarters because I was obligated for 3 years of service because they had paid 2 years of my education, and she only stayed they only paid 1 year of hers, so she got out 2 years in 2 years. So we sort of, in fact, but it's just an interesting thing, I just saw her for the first time about a month ago.
Wow.
Since the early 70s.
That's incredible.
And it was wonderful.
How is she doing?
She's doing great.
Okay.
And she actually ended up marrying one of the patients. So, we knew, I went to their wedding, but then we kept in contact through Christmas cards. But actually we saw her for the first time, so it was wonderful. So, I'm off topic here, but the friendships that you made are lasting.
Good.
Because you experienced a different life altogether. So.
Yes. Well, talk through, that aspect and the transition to your next role and next job. I would imagine that the training and the exposure you got there was quite a breadth from a medical exposure and experience, and probably made you, an easy hire and easy transition into, sort of the traditional medical.
Except traditional medical is very different than military medical. At least at that time, I don't know, I can't speak to it now, but it's interesting because in the military, and especially at that point in time when you were so busy, and we had interns then too, it was a hospital that accepted interns into there, so it was a teaching hospital at the same time. We all worked together. The doctors, the corpsmen, the nurses, we all were committed, to each other and working together. It's different. It's different than traditional hospital work. So it was a strange transition because I was expecting sort of what I was used to, and then that happened. You saw the big divide when you got out, especially at that time. I think it's changed now, but this was, again, I got out in 1972, so.
Right. Okay.
It was very much that if the doctor came on the unit, you know, you kind of gave your chair up to them and kind of, you know,
Okay.
so.
Whereas the military was a bit more mission
Oh.
and patient focused.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
okay.
I mean, you were there together. There wasn't any issue about, you know, who was.
Who had seniority
Who
and
is
rank,
seniority and
which is a
rank.
little bit odds with some of the typical stereotypes and biases
Yeah.
that, you know,
Yeah.
most folks, you know, that I've experienced generally assume that there's they're not wrong. There is a hierarchy and there is a chain of command that we
Yeah.
all appreciate and understand. But there's a collegiality and you know, an influence that's balances that. And then I think the military does well at sort of educating its members on understanding that system and, you know, how it works and when it is time for black and white and when
Yeah.
it is time for gray,
Yeah.
and how to operate in that ambiguity and uncertainty. So, well, good. So what did you do next?
So after I got out, I had contemplated, you know, of extending, but I had so many close friends and they all left. And I was sort of like, so my last year there, I said, no, I think I'm gonna
Feeling a little alone, and it was
feeling alone and ready to move on. So I came home back to Westborough for about a year, and I worked at Emerson Hospital in Concord. And I got a charge nurse position right away because, again, my military background, and it was an all orthopedic unit because they were looking at that I'd have heavy exposure to orthopedic.
right.
And then a couple of my Navy nurse friends had moved out to California, and they kept saying, come on, come on, come on. So I moved out to California for 7 years and worked in the Berkeley area.
Fun. It's probably it's always fun to be out in California, and
Yeah.
that particular time was
Yeah.
probably a good one.
It was good. But then I said, you know, my roots are back here, and all my family was back here. It was just me, and it was time, so I moved back.
Okay. Did you stay in the medical field?
I did. I went up and worked at Worcester Hanneman Hospital, which is no longer in existence, but it was a wonderful hospital, and I did diabetic education, and then I was a head nurse of a unit. So.
I'm curious if you had did you ever explore your Veterans Administration benefits? And
I didn't.
my assumption was, you know, a quick 3 years, relatively young, much like my wife. It sort of said, you know, I was only in for 6 years. I've remained healthy throughout, and I'll foot stomp that all veterans have the right to make a claim and can do it at any point, and that our Veteran Service Officer, Jeff Farrell, is available for it. But I know that you're not alone, that there's plenty out there that, you know, enjoyed the service, but you know, left those benefits for, you know, those that they think may deserve it more, or been exposed.
I had looked at staying in the reserves, but when I moved back here, there was not any medical reserve,
Right.
and so I didn't. When I went out there, I could have explored it again, and looking back, I wished I had, but you know,
Life goes on. Yep.
life goes on. You're not going that way anymore. So
Yeah, I've run into many folks. One of my last roles was as the commander of the Air Force ROTC unit, and with that, you know, helping coach young, soon-to-be lieutenants about their careers, and, you know, advising on guard and reserve options, and the guard and reserve offers a wonderful, you know, resource and capability. But as you point out, you know, you're trying to make some matches that may not be, you know, organic to the location that you want.
right.
So you're playing compromise with, you know, two interests. So finding that sweet spot of the unit and the specialty that you want to do, and the location may not always blend.
Yeah.
So Okay. As you look back, are there, lessons that you take away from that particular time?
Well, I think the sadness of it. I received letters from some of the corpsmen because they got trained stateside and then they were sent off to Vietnam. And the sadness from getting those letters back and knowing how sad they were, and what they were going through. And I think because of the reception that the Vietnam vets got coming back, which was not what you expected it to be. I didn't experience that, and I had to fly in uniform a lot, but I know so many of them.
And no protesters outside of St. Albans?
No, we never had that experience. But interesting enough, I did go down for the dedication of the Women's Vietnam Memorial down in Washington, D.C., and it was, you marched through it. And all along the side, there were a lot of Vietnam vets there. And I was struck by that these were vets that I think their life stood still when they came back. That, they never could quite move on because of the trauma that they endured and the reception that they got when they returned.
It's certainly a challenging time, and I'm very grateful to have lived in an era where that's almost 180 degrees out. Such a positive, supportive public.
Yeah, it was just, unfortunately, it was a war that was not popular.
How did your family react to your service and your time in uniform?
I have to tell you that my father was thrilled. He was never so proud, and I knew that. And my mother too, but my father was, he had wanted to join the Seabees, and he couldn't because he had a hernia. And they said, well, you get that hernia repaired, and we'll rethink that. But he didn't have the money. The health care system wasn't what it was, and he didn't have the money to have the surgery. So he always felt that he should have, could have, but circumstances didn't allow that.
Okay. Did you run into anyone that you had given advice, yay or nay, on military service?
Interesting enough, probably not.
Okay.
Yeah, that's interesting. No, I'd have to be honest. I had a nephew that went into the Navy, and I have two great nephews that one was in the Marine Corps and one was in the Air Force. He went to the Air Force Academy and graduated from there, and he's a pilot.
Super.
But not because I advised them to do that. That was just, they had made that decision themselves.
Yep. But having a positive reinforcement from your father and the pride, I think certainly reinforces the positive participation and the positive impact that service does.
I would. It was wonderful in one way, and it was terrible in another way. And you kind of have to balance that out. But for me, it was a wonderful experience because I got to see firsthand what it was all about. But again, the sadness. Yep.
No, and thank you again for your service and stepping into that role. It takes a special kind of person to be in medical field, regardless of whether it be uniformed or not. But uniform, seeing the scars of combat firsthand, and then being able to care and step into that, I think is significant. Okay.
One of the things that I did because of my Navy experience, so when I was out in California in the mid-1970s, they were doing Operation Baby Lift. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It was Gerald Ford's program, but it was trying to get orphans out of Vietnam. before, because Saigon was
About to fall.
about to fall. And so I did go on the last flight to take, the orphans out of there. And it was, again, we had a plane load full of all ages.
Okay.
But some, we had a medical unit set up right in where first class would normally be. And, so all different ages were coming back at that point. And that was the last flight, and Saigon fell right after that.
Yeah. You were still in the service?
I was not in the service,
I
but
didn't think you were. Because you had been.
because I had been, they were looking for volunteers. So
Okay. Tell me about that, the flight path, the time and duration, how quickly you found out about it?
Interesting enough, they said, okay, we're going over, we're going in, we're going and getting out. So don't bring anything with you, no clothes, it's just an in and out kind of thing. So we went out in the dead of night. The plane took off from Oakland.
Okay.
And we landed in the Philippines because we couldn't go any further than that. Things were really rocky because this was very close to when Saigon fell.
Okay.
And so instead of being in and out, we were there for 7 days in the Philippines.
Okay.
No change of clothes, nothing. It was an interesting time.
Yes. Not sure if you will make it in or,
Yeah. And so then they were able to get the orphans out, and so we flew off from the Philippines. So I never did get into Vietnam.
Okay. So they brought the orphans to
into
the
the Philippines to the Clark Air Force Base.
Transloaded them.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, do you any idea what happened to some of those orphans and where you returned to, back to Oakland?
No, actually, we ended up being diverted to L.A.
Okay.
And that was a traumatic experience because what they did is we had Laird's file boxes. That's where we put the babies in all the seats. And they unloaded all of them on
On the tarmac?
the tarmac. And it was not a good experience.
Right.
But, so I don't know what happened at that
And
point.
those were certainly the youngest. Were there toddlers and
They were all sorts. They were
okay.
teenagers, toddlers. And there was controversy. I won't admit that we didn't know. I was naive, I thought this was a wonderful thing. There was issues about whether there was money exchanged to get some children out of that situation, but they actually had parents. They were not necessarily orphans. So,
Okay.
but at the time, I felt I was doing the right thing. So,
Yes, and I guess count me as the eternal optimist that offered a number of children. And,
it did.
an
There were a number
opportunity.
that were, and there were a lot of sick. As I said, we actually lost one baby on the way home. So,
It stings.
it was not. They needed to. A lot of them needed to get out. Maybe some of them didn't. But their parents thought it was a good thing. So, yeah.
No, and those missions are always, the humanitarian missions, carry such emotional ties, and then the whole of government, the State Department is involved. Once you get back in the States, where are they housed? Who's taking control? Is this a military mission? Is it not? And it's a bit of a hydra. There's so many heads that are supporting and funding and administering.
But it was. It was set up by Gerald Ford. That was, and actually, my picture's in Gerald Ford Museum.
Really?
Because we had a news crew that actually followed us on that last mission. They hadn't been necessary with the other ones, but they followed us in that one. So, anyways, I said, my claim to fame is I'm in a presidential museum.
Library. Have you been there and seen
I have
yourself?
not. I have not. But
Well, not bad.
yeah.
I am not in a presidential library.
No.
And frankly, Bonnie, I'm okay with that. I kind of like my anonymity.
Yeah. That would be okay that I wasn't, but that's my claim to fame, I guess, if I have one.
Yeah. Well, I think we're approaching our sort of time. Are there any other stories or details that you'd like to share?
No, I think I would just like to reiterate that I'm very proud to have served in the military. It did wonders for me. I learned a lot about myself, what I can do, and I hope that I've carried that through the rest of my life. Maybe failed at some points, but
We're all human,
Yeah.
but it certainly sounds like you've done very well and done us proud from a fellow veteran. So thank you again for your service. Thank you for sharing your story. To our friends at home, hopefully this has been a reminder that veterans come in all shapes and sizes with all varied stories. I'd like to remind our audience that our Veteran Service Officer, Jeff Farrell, maintains an office on the first floor of the town hall, and his contact information can be seen on the screen at the end of today's show. Both he and the Veterans Advisory Board are here to help guide you to the resources and benefits that your uniformed service may have earned you. And a reminder to the community that Westborough will be holding its annual Memorial Day observance on Monday, May 27th. We hope to see you there. Bonnie Rae Ellis will be our Grand Marshal and have an opportunity to speak at that event. And then finally, I'd like to thank Westborough Television for their continued support in putting this Veterans Corner together. And of course, a big thank you to today's guest, Bonnie Rae Ellis, for joining us, sharing her story. And until next time, thank you for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful week.